Welcome to this module. So we added JavaScript to our project. Now it's time to dive into responsive design. Because until now, we are working on our website, we are adding style to it, and the look improves more and more. But the problem is that we are only focusing on to the desktop version of it. Nowadays, a lot of users will visit your website from mobile devices. Therefore, it is really important to ensure that our website looks awesome on both mobile devices and desktop devices. And to achieve this, we need to implement a responsive design. As the name already indicates, a design which adapts to the device our website visitors are using. So in this module, we will have a look at the difference between hardware and software pixels, because there is an important core concept behind it, which we need to understand to ensure that our website scales correctly to a desktop or a mobile device. We'll also have a look at the viewport meta tag in HTML. Well, this is a CSS course, but this is a really important meta tag we have to add and understand to be able to create such a responsive design. Therefore, we'll have a closer look at that. And finally, we'll have a look at media queries and how we can add them to our code with add media. And with the combination of these tools and these concepts, we should be able to turn our nice desktop website into a really cool responsive website. So what have we achieved so far? Before we dive into that, you might have noticed that the website and the dev tools are a bit smaller when comparing it to the previous modules. The reason for that is that I decreased the zoom level. I'm now at 100% zoom, and the reason for that is that now the pixels you see right here, when we change the width in the developer tools, the 1500 pixels right here, for example, are exactly equal to the pixels we define in our code. This will become important throughout this module, as we will work a lot with these, changing the width thing right here. Therefore, I hope you can still read all the core content on the website, but I think this is the better approach to really get the connection between the code and the actual site width right here. So with that, what have we achieved so far? Well, we have our starting page, which looks nice on the desktop device. The same thing is true for packages, still not perfect yet, as you can see with the footer down here, for example. And the customers page, also nice. We see also the footer problem, but these are things we can definitely solve. But if we now go back to our starting page, for example, and decrease the width, like that right here, well, then you can see that our site adjusts to this smaller width, but we have a lot of issues. For example, the navbar up here is kind of a mess. Then we can see that the different plans are also not really well organized. We can see that the pricing right here is outside of the box. The same thing is true for recommended, or also if we decrease it further for the text right here. And we can also see that our SVGs right here are also not displayed correctly. So basically our website is only partially responsive at the moment. We have additional issues. For example, this hamburger menu right here is visible all the time, although we actually only need it on the mobile device. So what we need concepts and tools to make the site responsive. And for that, we first have to understand the difference between hardware or device pixels and software or CSS pixels. So what's the difference? What are these different pixel types? Well, so far we played around right here in the dev tools and decreased our width right here, and we saw that the page partially reacts, not perfect yet, but we have kind of a reaction. So basically our browser understands that we have less width available. The problem at the moment though is that our browser does not really understand the difference between a desktop device and a mobile device. How can I prove this to you? Well, if we go to our dev tools and now click onto this symbol right here, like that, then we can see that we have a mobile device right here. I'll dive into that in a few seconds. just some information about this menu right here before. Here we can choose different simulated devices. So we have the iPhone 8 selected right here. You can use an iPhone 7 or a Nexus or a Galaxy S5, just as you prefer. I'll stick to the iPhone 8. You can also change the zoom level. I will use 150 maybe, so that you can see everything. And if you increase the width a bit more maybe, you can find options to define if your device is online, offline, or with a worse connection. Not something we'll dive into now. You can change the mode between landscape and portrait like that. We'll stick to portrait though for the moment. And you have these 3 dots right here, which allow you, for example, to hide the device frame or to show the device frame. I'll show it to you because I think it looks a little bit better. However, the important thing that you might have noticed is that although we had this partially responsive design on a smaller screen in the desktop version, so if I click right here and decrease the screen width, this reaction right here, well, this is not happening in our mobile design, because although we only have a mobile device, which should actually be smaller than our desktop device if we decrease the width, the browser basically squeezes the entire website onto our mobile phone, and with that, there is no responsive design at all available at the moment. Now, what's the reason for that? Well, first, have a look at this thing right here, at these pixels. We can see that in this simulator, in this mobile phone simulator in the DevTools, a width of 375 pixels right here is assumed, and a height of 667 pixels. Let's focus onto these 375 pixels right here, because if we inspect our background image, which basically occupies the entire width right here, and if we now increase that a bit right here and scroll down, this is our menu we had before right here, so our computed menu, this one right here. As we have more space for the DevTools now, this is now directly available right here. And if we scroll down, we can see that we have a width of 980 pixels, which is quite big actually, especially if we take into account that the Chrome developer tools actually assume a width of 375 pixels for this iPhone 8. Now, as you can see, there is something not working correctly at the moment. And to understand this, we can go to this page right here. This is 𝗧𝗜𝗢𝗓𝗏. A link to this website can of course be found attached to this video. And on this page, you can see how absolute lengths are translated into pixels or vice versa in CSS. And right here, you can see that 1 inch right here is equal to 69 pixels. Now, in case you're not familiar with inch, 1 inch are 2.54 centimeters. So 1 inch is 69 pixels. And we had 980 pixels for the width of our background image right here. This one, this is 980 pixels. So if we translate that into inches, we have more than 10 inches right here for our device width. And although an iPhone 8 is a big smartphone, I don't think it's more than 10 inches. And this shows you exactly where the problem is coming from we have at the moment. The browser is of course able to identify the hardware pixels, so the pixels this iPhone has by default. But it will just translate these pixels based on this logic right here. So he will say, okay, I have a specific amount of pixels, so I assume that with each 96 pixels I have, the device has a width of 1 inch. And while this works perfect for monitors or desktop devices, for a mobile phone, this leads to a website being displayed like this, which is of course way too small. And what causes this problem, of course, in the end, is that modern mobile phones have a really high pixel density. And this high pixel density, so a lot of pixels in a really little amount of space, lead to the problem that these, as I would call them, traditional ways of translating pixels into inches, and by that specify the amount of information that is displayed on the device, is not working anymore. So if pixels are translated into inches, and we have the problem that we have too many pixels and not enough space available or a too small device, then we can either increase the size of the device, which is difficult because, well, our mobile phones have the size they have, or decrease the amount of pixels. Because if we have less pixels available, then less information would be displayed at the same time on our display, and with that we would have a bigger font size and a bigger size of the entire content of the website actually. And if you now go to this page right here, mydevice.io, and click onto compare devices, we can find the solution for that problem. Because here we have our iPhone 8, for example, and we can see the physical width and the physical height. So these are the hardware pixels I'm referring to. And right here, you can now see the CSS width and the CSS height. And we saw these numbers already, because if we go back to our website, we can see that this is exactly the width and the height that the Chrome developer tools show us as the device height and width for this iPhone 8. And this basically is due to the fact that we have a so-called pixel ratio. In the case of the iPhone 8, we have a pixel ratio of 2. This basically means that we take the physical height divided by 2, as you can see it, and with that we have the height that is now assumed by CSS for our mobile phone. And with this pixel ratio, CSS would only assume a height of 676 pixels for our iPhone 8. And if we think back about our calculation right here, that 96 pixels are 1 inch, then we would only have, let's say, round about 6 inches of height that the browser understands for our iPhone. And with that, we have a height that is a lot closer to the real one when comparing it to the initial one, which led to this strange way of displaying the website right here. And with that, we would be able to display our website in a better scaled way. The question now is, how can we achieve that goal? How can we tell the browser that it should apply this pixel ratio to make sure that it translates the actual hardware pixels, so 750, 1334, into 375, 667? Well, the answer is we simply have to add this viewport meta tag. For that, we can go back to our website and actually switch back to our code. And as we are on the starting page, we can go to the main index.html file right here, and now add the meta tag right here as the third meta tag. And we simply add meta. Now we add name, which should be viewport, like that. And now we add a second attribute, content. For the content, we will add width equals the device width. I'll dive into these attributes in the next lectures in a bit more detail, but generally this simply means that the width of the viewport should be equal, well, to the device width, and with that we can recognize the device width of our device. That's the important thing we didn't have so far. So we should add device width, and then we can also add initial scale, which equals 1.0. As I said, I will dive into that in one of the next lectures in a bit more detail. If we now go back to our website and reload it, you can see that the style totally changed. Because now our browser is able to identify the actual device width we have right here on our smartphone. This means he does not consider the actual hardware pixels, but considers the CSS, the software pixels, so this 375 times 667. And for a width of 375 pixels, this is the way our website is displayed. And if we now go back to our desktop version and also decrease the size to this 375 pixels right here, well, then you can see, if we switch back and increase the size a bit, that this is pretty identical now. And with that, we applied a first very important core concept to be able to apply a responsive design to our website. Now, before we dive deeper into this viewport meta tag and also into media queries, let me show you a quick comparison between the viewport meta tag and the media queries in the next lecture. So which tools do we have to add a responsive design? Well, we just saw that we have this viewport meta tag. This is created or added in HTML. And we have media queries. We'll dive into these later in this module, and media queries are of course created in CSS, because that is what this course is all about, right? Now let me show you the differences between these two concepts and especially why we need both to create our responsive website. The viewport meta tag is required to be able to adjust our site to the device viewport. We just saw that. If we only take into account the actual pixels, we will not be able to display our websites correctly or in a convenient and appropriate way on mobile devices. Therefore, in addition to the actual pixels, we need to take into account the device width, and with that automatically apply a specific pixel ratio, which will then allow us to translate the hardware pixels into these CSS pixels. We just did that. The important thing is though that we cannot apply any design changes. So in case you want to say, if I am in a mobile version, I would like to change the entire structure of my website, I would like to add some things or maybe make some things disappear, this is not possible. The only thing it does, it translates the pixels according to the pixel ratio and therefore adjusts the way our website is displayed. In contrast to that, we have the media queries. The media queries allow us to change the design depending on the actual size. And that's the important difference. Media queries really allow us to specify the way our website is displayed depending on the size. And size does not mean a single size. We are able to define specific rules based on the width, for example, where specific properties of our website should change. And I'm referring to properties, so I'm not only talking about the width of our elements. You could change basically anything you want with such media queries. You could also change colors, for example, so we will dive into these options, and as you will see, media queries are really cool and allow you to really adjust the look of your website depending on different device sizes. The important thing with that is, of course, that these changes are defined by us. With the viewport, the impact we have is limited because the viewport will just translate the pixels, as I said, and that's it. But with the media queries, we can really dive into the design and specify a unique design for the different devices we have. Now, as this still sounds kind of abstract probably, we will now dive deeper into the first concept, the viewport, and after that, have a closer look at media queries. So let's have a closer look at this viewport meta tag and see what we added there and what else we might be able to add there. For that, I'll go back to our index.html file, the main index.html file, and let's now have a look at it step by step. The first attribute we added was this viewport attribute. This simply allows us to, tell this meta tag that it should target the viewport, so actually the area on our device inside our browser that should display our website. The second attribute we added was this content attribute. With that, we are now able to set the width of our page that we have. So the page on the viewport, the visible part of it basically, this should be equal to the width of the screen of our device. And that's the important thing we talked about in the previous lectures. With that, we were able to tell our browser that our device is a smaller device, a mobile device, and therefore it should apply this pixel ratio conversion. Because otherwise, we would have the problem that we had initially, that our browser simply has a look at the amount of hardware pixels it has, and therefore is not aware of the fact that we have a smaller device, and with that simply displays the entire website squeezed into our mobile device screen. Then we have this initial scale information right here. The initial scale simply defines the zoom level that we have. 1.0 simply means that we have the default value. This means no zoom is applied. If we would change that to 1.5, for example, like that, and go back to our website, reload it, it's not working. That's a little Chrome Developer Tools bug. But if we simply go back to the desktop mode and go back to the mobile mode, you can see that the website, as expected, is now zoomed in. What is also interesting is that we can also zoom in more if we want to, basically without any limitation, as you can see, quite far. And we can also zoom out a bit, as you can see. Now, zooming in and zooming out are the next types of information that we can specify in this meta tag. Because, for example, we could say that our user, let's simply add it right here, user scalable, like that. This can be either yes, which is the default value or the default behavior. So as you can see, that's what we have. We have our initial scale with this slight zoom in now, and the user can zoom out or zoom in. As you can see, zooming out is basically the same zoom level we had before, so no zoom applied basically. In case you say you don't want your visitors to be able to zoom, which I would not recommend because normally we would like to give our users as much freedom as possible so that they can view our website in the most convenient way. But let's say you want to restrict the zoom and not allow your users to zoom right here, then you can simply set user scalable to no. And if we do that, reload and go back right here, then I am not able to zoom in or out anymore. I can scroll around, of course, that's not the problem, but zooming is not possible anymore. But as I said, this is probably not the behavior you would like to have, so you could either set this to yes then, or as yes is the default value, you could simply delete that entirely. Now there are two more interesting types of information that we can add to our content attribute right here. The first one is the maximum scale. Right here. If you think about the initial scale, which set the default zoom level when the user enters our website, the maximum scale simply restricts the maximum zoom level that is available. So let's set this to 2.0, for example. And if we do that and go back like this, we can see that this is the default value. We can zoom out, that's not a problem. But zooming in is now restricted. Without that maximum scale, let me quickly cut it out right here and reload the page and go back. We can see that zooming out is not a problem, but zooming in was possible a lot more up to this level. Now, if we put it back in, as you can see it, this allows us to limit that zoom level that's possible, like this and like that. Now, the last thing we could add is we have a maximum scale. We can also add a minimum scale, of course. The minimum scale simply restricts the amount of zooming out level that our user is allowed to apply. So let's set this to 1.2, for example, like that. And if we now go back and reload the page once again and do our little trick right here, then you can see that now I'm not able to zoom out entirely like we had it before. If I set this to 1.0, which would be able to the value of not having a zoom at all, then we can again reload it, go back, and as you can see, now we have the website back in the initial form where we didn't apply any kind of zoom. And these are actually the main functionalities of this viewport meta tag that we should know right here. The important thing that you have to keep in mind is that without adding this meta tag, we are not really able to implement a mobile design to our website. But this also means that in case you didn't create a mobile-first website, we'll dive into that in the next lectures, and by that maybe you don't have a mobile design at all, not adding the meta tag might also be an option. Because imagine this is your final website and you only have this desktop website, which looks actually quite nice, but you don't create this mobile site for whatever reason. Then you don't want to show your user the website in this version. Then the better, but definitely not recommended approach would be to leave out this meta tag and by that present your website like this. But we of course want to create a responsive website and also a website which looks awesome on mobile devices, so we need this meta tag. And with that, we will now get rid of the scaling options because we don't need this, to be honest. We only need 1.0 as initial scale, so no zoom at all. As you can see, this looks fine like that. Not fine, we'll improve it, but this looks okay like that. And I already mentioned this mobile first approach a few seconds ago. Now let's dive into media queries and this mobile first design in the next lectures. I have to admit something. We did a mistake when creating the website so far. No worries. We didn't do a mistake, we did it on purpose, but actually the approach, how we created this website, is not the state-of-the-art approach we use nowadays. Because normally you start creating your website mobile first. This means you start creating the page in a way that it looks nice on mobile devices. The reason for that is simply that many users are using mobile devices now to access websites, and with that you want to make sure that you have a nice looking website for mobile devices. As soon as you got the mobile version, you'll also have a look at the desktop version and also ensure that you implement a responsive design, which also translates nicely into these desktop websites. Now this brings us to the question, why didn't we follow this mobile first approach then? Well, because we just learned how to work with CSS, and learning CSS is easier if we use a normal desktop website because we have more space available and we can try out things in a more convenient way. But now that the basics are set, it's of course time to change this way we think and only work mobile first from now. This means that in the next lectures, we'll always have a look at the mobile version, make sure it looks nice, and then check the desktop version. So that's the approach we will follow from now on throughout the entire course. With that in mind, we can now continue and finally learn how to use media queries, because you would probably agree that this page right here doesn't look really good at the moment. So let's improve that. So let's now understand how we can add and use such media queries in our project. Before we do that, let me quickly copy our meta viewport tag right here and make sure that we also have it in all the other index.html files. Because of course, we want to make sure that our entire website is responsive and not just the starting page. So let's see, in the customers folder right here, we have the meta tag already, so no need to add it right here. But I think in the packages folder, yeah, right here we have to add it. So let's maybe add it right here as the third meta tag we have. So with the viewport meta tag being added to all our pages, we can now focus onto our responsive design by using media queries. For that, I will focus onto the starting page. So we will need the main CSS file, this one right here. On our website, we will leave the mobile view right here, because as we now added this viewport meta tag, we can also play around with this developer tool right here to change the width of our page and to make sure that we kind of, well, simulate our look on a mobile device. And you can always do this by having a look at the pixels right here that indicate the width that we have in pixels. We will dive deeper into how you can think about these limits and which limits you want to have different styles for. But for the moment, I would just say that we will define a style which looks maybe good right here for 350 pixels up to, let's say, around about 40 rem. This would be 640 pixels, so right there. So that's the goal. Basically, I want to have a design which looks good from, let's say, here. This would be a really small device. Let's maybe say 250 pixels width, like that, up to 640 pixels right here. So up to here, we want to have a design that looks nice. And then we want to change our design. For example, increase the font size right here, because we say that starting from 640 pixels, we have a bigger device, a tablet, or actually a desktop device even, so we can use the space we have. And what do we want to change? Well, of course, we want to change the navbar up here, because this doesn't look good, but we will change that later. But right now on the main page, we have to change our image, because I would like to make sure that the height of our image increases once we hit that 640 pixels border right here. Then I want to change the font size. So the font size of the slogan, this is always equal, and this should increase once we hit that 640 pixels limit. And of course the plans right here, because these are not organized quite nicely at the moment. So we should make sure that once we are below this 640 pixels, that the plans are not displayed next to each other, but below each other. Additionally, I would also like to change the style of the footer down here, because maybe the footer should be displayed above each other on the smaller design. And once we are in our bigger design, it should be displayed the way it is right now. Now again, this sounds kind of abstract at the moment, so let's have a look at that step by step, add a media query and see how it works, and then dive deeper step by step. And for that, we need a starting point. And the starting point now is, as I said in the last lecture, the mobile first design. This means all our code right here, so all the code we have in our main CSS file, is now supposed to work in a way that it looks nice on our mobile view, or what we define as the mobile view. In our case, the mobile view, so the starting point, is everything below 640 pixels. And this is how we will approach it. I will now style the website in a way that it looks good, for example, right here and right there, so for different widths. This should look good on all these sizes. And then we will add a media query, which will then change the design to make sure it looks also nice or even different on devices which are equal or bigger to a width of 640 pixels, 40 rem. Now let's start with the slogan right here, because I said that I would like to change the font size of the slogan, because on smaller devices I think that the slogan should be a bit bigger. So for that, we can go back to our code right here. So as I said, I'm in the main CSS file, and maybe first cut out this section title right here and add it below the product overview H1 selector. That's not necessary actually. I just want to make sure that we have the product overview ID selector. So this is basically this one right here, which contains the image and the slogan, and the product overview H1 selector, which contains the slogan, below each other. However, I would like to change the font size of our slogan, so let's add the font size property right here. And let's set it to maybe 1.6 rem. Let's see if this looks good. Like that, and let's reload the page now. Did you see it? It's now slightly bigger. We know how this works. If we inspect that now, we can see that our slogan now has a font size of 1.6 rem. So we now change that font size, but well, it stays the same, right? No matter how big our device is, the width doesn't have an impact onto this slogan right here. And that's where the media queries come into play. Because if we now go back to our code and simply add the following code to it, add media, this simply initializes the media query and tells the code that this is, well, a media query. Then we have to specify a if statement, basically. That's how you can imagine it. This simply tells you if this condition is met, then please apply the following code. And our condition right here will be a min width, right, of 40 rem. Have a note at the way I wrote this code. So you write the condition you want to have, so min width, then the colon, and then the width that you want to specify. This simply means as soon as the width of our device in software in CSS pixels is equal or larger than 40 rem, then this media query should kick in. And what does kicking in mean? Well, we simply have to write normal CSS code now. This means we need a selector. And then we can specify the properties that should change as soon as this condition is met. For example, we want to change the font size of our product overview H1 ID selector right here, because on larger devices, I would like to increase the font size a bit more. So what we can do now is we can copy our ID selector. And now write again the normal CSS code. That's important. You can see the curly braces right here of the media query. And inside this curly braces, I now simply add a normal CSS rule. So we can now say that we want to have a font size of, let's say, maybe 3 rem, not 4, 3 rem right here, like that. If I do this now and reload the page, you can see that our font size increased. Why did it increase? Well, because the width of our website was equal, or in that case above, to 640 pixels. If I now decrease the window, can you see it? As soon as we are below 640 pixels, the font size jumps back to our initial code. And the initial code is this one right here, the code that we specified. And that's actually the core idea of such a media query. We will dive deeper into what we can change right here, and if we can also add other rules right there basically, so other if statements, we can do that of course, but that's actually the media query type we will use throughout this course, and also the one you would normally use, and that's important if you follow this mobile first approach I was talking about, because that's the idea behind it. You simply start by creating your code in a look that is equal to the one you want to have for your mobile users. And as soon as this looks nice, you simply add such a media query right here, define a limit, so whenever you say, okay, as soon as the width is equal or bigger than a specific limit, I'm no longer on a mobile device, and then you just add the selectors and the properties you want to change for your desktop devices, for example. We will also see that we can have multiple of these definitions right here. So we can not only have the mobile or the desktop device, we could add a lot of different rules basically, and a lot of different limits or borders we have right here, which specify different properties for different device widths. But as I said, we will have a look at all that in the next lecture. Let's focus onto this media query now and add a bit more code. Because, of course, we are not limited to the font size right here. We can basically change any property in such media queries. For our slogan right here, this is not required though, but we can also add another selector, because we could also say we add our product overview selector right here, this ID selector, which basically targets the image, and we could place it above right here. And now also change some properties for this image. Which properties could this be? Well, if we have a look at the image right here on the bigger devices, we could say, well, we have more space available, so why don't we also increase the size or the height of the image and maybe also change the position of it a bit. This could be two things that we can simply change. So let's, for example, add the height property right here, like that, because we initially have a height of our image of 33 VH, so 33% of the viewport. Why don't we change that height a bit and increase it to 40 VH, like that? If we do that, and let me decrease the size right here, or let's maybe keep it the way it is. If we reload the page now, you can see that the height of the image now also changed. If we inspect that right here, you can see that the image height is now 40 VH. If we decrease the size, can you see it? Both the font size and the image decrease because we are below our media query limit that we specified, and therefore the height again is 33 VH. That's basically how it works. And we can also add another property. As I said, we are not limited to one single property. We could also add the background position property right here, like that. And we have left 10% and bottom 70% right here. Why don't we just change that to, let's say, 50% and 25%, for example? You can, of course, choose any value you want. But the important thing is that if we now increase the size and reload the page, we can see that the position of the image changed now. And important, this is also only true if we are, as you can see it, above or equal to our 640 pixels or 40 rem limit that we specified. And with that, you actually already understood the basic concept behind such media queries. A media query simply allows you to define a specific condition, a if condition as you can imagine it. And once this condition is true, you can change one or multiple properties of the selector of your choice. And as you can imagine, this is a really powerful tool which allows you to easily create responsive websites. However, before we dive deeper and apply more and more media queries, I would like to take a closer look at the media query itself. So let's have a look at the media queries and how they work and what they do in the next lecture. So which things do we have to know and to keep in mind regarding our media queries right here? The first thing to keep in mind is what I told you already. The way you read such a media query is basically like an if statement. You basically say that if a condition that I specify right here is true, then the following code will be applied. That's the easiest way to remember such a media query, and based on my experience, also the most logical way. That's the first thing to keep in mind. Think of media queries just like if statements. And this brings me to the second important thing that you have to keep in mind. Because I mentioned it before, we will now design our website from a mobile-first perspective. This means all our code outside the media queries is our mobile code. So the code that specifies the look of our website on mobile devices. And with that, our media query logic, so to say, the media query should kick in once we are above this border, so once our min width is equal or larger than the value we specify right here, is true. But of course, you could also create your website the other way around. And although I do not recommend that, as I said, we live in mobile times, so users will more and more access your website from mobile devices. So why not creating the website with this mobile first approach? But you could, of course, also create your website desktop first. This would basically mean that all the code we have right here is the code that makes sure that your website looks good right here in the desktop view, right here, for example. And as you can see, we might have to work on the image again because apparently my changes were not the smartest ones, but we'll have a look at that soon. However, this could be your starting point. You could say, I built my website for the desktop devices and my media queries should only help me to define a mobile design. Well, then you would simply turn this min width right here into a max width. Because this simply tells you that the media query should only kick in cases where the maximum width of your viewport is equal or smaller than the value you specify right here. That's of course the other way around, we do it right there. Because if we have a viewport that is, for example, 39 rem, then this code would be true. If we have a look at our code now, like that, and reload the page, you can see that we have a smaller font size right here. And if I would now decrease our size, like that, then you would see that the font size gets bigger once we are equal or below our 640 pixels. But that's of course not the way we want it to have right here, because we want to build our website mobile first. So let's add min width right here, like that. If we do that and reload the page, you can see we have the bigger font size right here. But these are the two approaches you have, mobile first and desktop first. And basically you are free to choose whichever approach you want, but I would recommend building or using the mobile first approach. The third thing that you should keep in mind is that you are, of course, not limited to a single media query. You could also add multiple media queries below each other. For example, if we copy that media query right here and add it right there, then we could say that we do not want to have our website to be built for two devices, mobile and desktop, for example, but we also want to have a version for really large devices, for example. And let's say that the large devices start right here at 60 RAM. For example, that's the second border we have, the second limit we have. There we should say that the height of our image should be 50 and the font size should be 5 RAM, for example. That's also possible. So as you can see, we have both media queries written below each other. Now, if we go back to our website and reload it, we can see that the behavior in the beginning remains the same. Here we have our mobile design. Then we have the border of 640 right here, where the second design kicks in. And if we make it bigger, can you see it? Then the third design kicks in right there. And that's also really important to keep in mind. You can have more than one media query at the same time. That's not a problem, because although this media query right here, our last one, is coming after this one in the code, it will not override the query right here. So the property right here, our font size 5 rem, will not override the 3 rem we have in our other query. Because although it comes later in the code, so based on the cascading nature, we already know, you could assume that. But as these properties will only become true if the query, so if this if statement is true, this is not a problem at all. So you can add multiple media queries below each other, which are specifying different limits. Of course, if I would add the min width of 40 rem right here, like that, then this would be a problem, because then it would be overwritten, as you can see right here, because the media query right here is true, this is also true, but this one comes later in the code, therefore the cascading nature comes into play, and with that only the rules right here would be applied. But as soon as you change different limits for your media queries, this is not a problem at all. However, there is one problem though, because as I said, the code will just run from top to bottom and apply the media queries according to their order basically. But this only works if you specify the order correctly. This means you have the width right here with 40 rem, and then you have the next border with 60 rem. If you would turn it around and start with 60 rem right here, and then go down to the 40 rem, what would basically happen then is your code goes from top to bottom and finds that this media query right here is true, so this if statement is met, and this would lead to the following behavior. You would start right here with your mobile design. Then you have the 640 pixels right here with our first breaking point. And this is okay. As you can see right here, we have our min width of 40 rem. But the problem is that this is of course now true, well, for all widths we have, because the code simply goes from top to bottom, finds that this condition is met, so it will always apply this code right here. It cannot jump back to the 60 rem, of course. Therefore, the important thing is that you order your media queries according to the correct widths. This means you start with the smaller width right here with 40 rem and then with 60 rem for the second media query. And with that, we can now ensure that our browser always uses the media query that applies now, because we can see we now have our two breaking points again, because the browser simply goes from top to bottom, finds this query, says, okay, this is applied, and as soon as this if statement is true, it will apply that latest code right here. So that's really important. The order also matters right here for our media queries. So we can add multiple queries, that's not a problem, multiple media queries, also targeting the same selectors and the same properties, but we have to make sure that our conditions are set correctly, and in combination with that, we can really create different stylings for our website for different devices. There is one last important thing that I would like you to keep in mind. And this thing is, well, how can we specify these breaking points? We have the 40 rem right here, so the 640 pixels, but I just applied that because, of course, we prepared the project and we know that this works fine for us. But normally when you build your website, you need kind of an idea of where these breaking points could be. You can, of course, play around and have a look at your design, but you might want to target specific devices and make sure that you have logical breaking points to ensure that your website looks good on as many devices as possible and without having to add like 10 media queries right here. So one idea how to do this is if you go again to mydevice.io, for example, and go to compare devices, then you can select smartphones or tablets up here. And with that, you can get a really quick overview of the width and the height, important, choose the CSS width and height right here, of the width and height of the most common devices. For example, we have an iPad right here, we have a Galaxy Tab, and then you can see that, well, for example, 768 of width. That's of course in portrait mode, because we would normally build our websites for the portrait mode on tablets would be a good approximation or a good starting point for a breaking point that you could set. Because then you could make sure that you optimize your mobile design for, if you look at the smartphone width right here, we can see that the most modern smartphones have a width of more than 300 pixels. So basically, if your website looks good for widths between 300 pixels and 768 pixels, you would ensure that you have a nice looking website for most mobile phones. Then you could set your first breaking point at 768 pixels and then maybe make another breaking point at 1000 pixels, for example, for really big screens then. That's how you could approach that and how you could easily set your breaking points in a logical way. One additional thing I would like you to keep in mind though is that the way you add your media queries right here is not the correct one, to be honest. It's totally fine to add the media queries below the actual rule you have for your corresponding selectors. But in the end, and we will also do this in this course, once we finish our media queries, you would simply take them and paste them right here at the bottom of your code, like that. Because with that, other developers can easily find all your media queries and change them if necessary. And this helps us to keep our code more structured. However, for the purpose of this module now, we will add the media queries below their actual rule right here, as we did it so far, because it makes it easier for us to understand which elements we are referring to and what properties we want to change. Now with that, we set all the basics for our media queries. So in the next video, we can now continue working on our website. Because so far, the image looks fine, and the slogan, I think this is okay. But our mobile view for our plans, I don't think this looks good. So let's see how we can improve this by adding media queries in the next lecture. So with the core logic being set, it's now time to get our hands dirty and dive into the responsive design on our website. Now, before we do that though, we have two issues. The first issue is that we should get rid of that second media query right here. We can apply that, it's not a problem, but for our project, I would like to stick to this 40 rem limit right here for all our media queries, just to keep things simple. However, there is an additional problem, and the problem is this background image, because right here we can see that our woman right here, well, kind of gets her head stuck in the nav bar, and I don't think that's a good look. So let's quickly improve that by simply changing our left 10% and bottom 10% to center. That's the simplest solution for that. Max already told you about the details, how to format your background images. So with that, if we reload the page, you can see that the head is now going, well, not into the nav bar because the image is always centered. And I think this looks quite nice actually now. So with that, we can now continue with the responsive design of our plans. Because what I would like to achieve is that as soon as we are below our 640 pixels, so right here, this 40 rem, the plans should be displayed below each other. So there should just simply be 3 containers basically displaying all the information. For that, we need to work on the plans ID maybe. And especially inside this ID, we have the plan list class right here, and then the plan, the highlighted plan, and the premium plan. So 3 highlighted premium. So we might have to work on these classes. Therefore, if we go back to our code, we can start our work right here maybe with the plan class. Because the first thing I want to change is, I want to change this display style right here, because I don't want to have inline block elements, which then kind of show the behavior we have right here. I would like to have simple block elements. Therefore, what we can do, and keep in mind, this is the mobile first design, we can simply delete display inline block. What will happen then is, if I reload the page, you can see the plans are now displayed below each other. Why is this happening? Well, because, as you can see right here, each plan now again is a simple div. And we talked about the general behavior of a div. A div is a block level element and therefore occupies the entire space of the row where it is positioned. Now with that, we did our first step. By the way, of course, the desktop design is now a mess, but we'll work on that in our media query, of course. But for now, let's stick to our mobile design right here. So the general order is fine. We have a different way to display our plans, but the width should be different. For that, we can go back and get rid of that empty line maybe, and now simply change the width right here to 100%, like that. Let's see what happened now if we do that. Yeah, it looks better. Now the plans are basically occupying, well, almost 100%. Let's see why this is not working. Well, this should be due to the plan list class right here. Yeah, well, as we can see, the plan list class right here has a margin to the left and to the right. And we can also see why this is happening because we have a width of 80% only and this margin auto. So if we just change that to 100% and then actually also get rid of the margin auto because there should not be any margin left, let's see. Yeah, then we can see that we have our elements now displayed below each other still, and we got rid of the margin. So that's getting closer to the look that I would like to have. What we can also see is that our website is not really formatted perfectly yet. You can see this little gap right here between the image and the right border, and we can also go to the left and to the right of our plans. And if we inspect the plan, we can see that we have a margin around it. We can see this down here. So let's maybe get rid of the left and right margin. So I'm in the plan selector, class selector again. And the margin top and bottom is fine, but I think to the left and to the right, we should have a 0 margin. If I reload the page now, we should see that, yeah, now it works fine. Now we don't have this gap between the image and the right limit of the developer tools of the website right here. And we can see that we can scroll perfectly through our different plans, and we don't have any margins to the left and to the right. So this looks nice actually. We can then also clean our code a bit and actually get rid of the vertical alignment now, because we should actually be able, yes, as you can see, as the elements are, well, basically using the entire space, the vertical alignment is not required anymore. So we also made sure our code is a bit leaner now. I will also comment out the plan list right here for the moment, because we don't need that wrapping container, so this container right here, for the mobile view. This is working totally fine without it, but it might be the case that we need it later, so I will keep it like that. Let's see if we have to add it in our media query. Another thing that I would like to change is that we should get rid of this shadow we have around our recommended plan right here, because the highlighted plan, this one, as you can see, has this box shadow around it. And although it looks great in the desktop version, I don't think it's nice right here because it looks kind of like an error. So we should also get rid of the box shadow right here. Let me also comment this out for the moment, because we might need it later in the media query, because there the shadow looked actually quite nice. So with that, we also improved the look again, and yeah, it looks better as I think. And with that, we are actually, well, at least for the moment, done with the responsive design of our plans. So with our box shadow removed, our website looks actually quite nice in the mobile view right here. So now it's time to add a media query, because we want to make sure that the page, well, doesn't look like that on the desktop devices, because I don't think that's a good look. So let's go back to the code, and as we learned it in the last lecture, we will add the media query right here below our, well, actual part of the website. That's not the way we should do it in the end, or we will do it in the end. As I said, we will add all the media queries below the code at the end of this course. But for now, let's add the media query. We will use the same width we had before, so our 40 rem. And let's now start with our plan right here. So the plan class. And let's see what we have to change right here. As we said, for the mobile view, we now defined these rules. And while these rules in general are fine, there is one really important thing that we have to change. And that's, of course, we need to change the way our elements are displayed, because right now we have changed them to block level elements, but we want to make sure that these are displayed as inline block elements again. So let's add display inline block right here, like that. And with that, if we reload the page, you can see nothing changes. What's the reason for that? Well, if we go back to our code and go back to the plan, we can see that we applied a width of 100%. And that's of course not what we want for the desktop view. For the desktop view, we should go back to our initial value, which was at 30% width. So let's add width 30% right here, like that. And with that change in place, we can see that our plans look better again. We still have some issues, but we'll fix these in the next minutes. A first fix would be to again apply the vertical align, because we got rid of that, but for the desktop version, this should definitely be right here and improve the look already. Let's see what happens. Yes, as we can see, now these two plans are more in line with the recommended plan again. So that was definitely an improvement that was required. What we need though is, we need to add back our plan list code right here, this one. And we can actually take the entire code, because we don't need it up here, but we need the code in our media query. So let's maybe add it at the beginning directly, like that. And with that, we have our wrapping container added back. So this container should take place in case the media query is applied. And if we now reload that, we can see that our text or our boxes are centered again, because remember, we just added this container back, so the code for this container here. And because of that, we basically got our style back that we had before in our desktop version. And the cool thing now is, of course, that once we are below our 640 pixels, right here, we can see some issues though. As you can see right here, the box is too small. We'll fix that. Then you can see the website jumps from the mobile to the desktop version. And that's pretty cool actually, as I think. But let's go back to the code and let's see if we have to add some more properties to our media query. Do you remember one thing we deleted? Because if we scroll up, we also commented out our highlighted plan, so the box shadow for our highlighted plan. And while we didn't want to have it right here in the mobile version, I think it makes sense to add it back in the desktop version. So let's add our plan highlighted class right here. Plan highlighted, this one. And let's add this declaration back in, like that. And if we now go back and reload the page, we can see that the box shadow is visible in the desktop view, but in the mobile view, it's of course not there. Because, always keep in mind, these declarations or these rules will only be applied if we have this media query applied, and this is only true if this if condition is met, so if the min width is equal or larger than this 40 rem. With that, there is only one issue that I just saw that we should also fix. Because if I decrease the size, we can see that the box is a bit too small, so the recommended DD is outside of the box. And if I increase the width again, well, the boxes get bigger and bigger. And I don't think that this is a nice look. And if you remember back the units module, we learned that we have these min width and max width properties. Now, wouldn't it be a good idea to apply these right here and to specify a min width for our plans right here, maybe around about here, for example, and also a max width, so that we can say we don't want our plans or the boxes for our plans to become wider than a specific width that we define. So what would be a minimum width that we want to have for our plans right here? Well, let's maybe have a look at our highlighted plan, for example. And if we now go to compute it, we know that already, and scroll down, then we can find the width right here. if we now decrease the width, right there, now the formatting changed, so now we can find it down here. So we have 300, let me increase that, we have 336 pixels, and if we decrease it, yeah, maybe it shouldn't get smaller than this, or maybe a bit, maybe like that, something like that. So around about 210, 205 pixels. So let's maybe use a min width then, right here for our plan, the min width, which should be equal to 13 rem. So 13 rem, 13 times 16 is 208, so this is fine. Let's add a space right here. If we do that and reload the page, we can now see that our box, can you see it, doesn't become smaller than these 208 pixels that we defined. And if we decrease it further, it looks nice all the time actually. There is a certain point, so below 200 pixels, where it still doesn't look perfect. But to be honest, if you remember back when we had a look at the different device widths that we have, having a smartphone with a width below 200 pixels is pretty uncommon. So therefore, I think we can live with that for the moment. This is fine. What we need to add though is also a max width, because as you can see right here, the plans keep increasing. So let's also do this. And for the max width, let's also have a look at the recommended plan, the highlighted plan. And let's see what we computed right here. 496 pixels. I think that's way too big. I think round about here. What's that now? Yeah, maybe round about 400 pixels, which would be 25 rem. So let's maybe add a max width right here of 25 rem, like that. And if we reload the page again, we should see that the boxes don't become bigger than the 25 rem we defined. And that's pretty amazing already, right? Because now we have two really significantly different designs implemented on our website. The mobile design right here, and our desktop design, which keeps increasing up to certain screen widths, but then is limited once we hit a certain maximum width that we just defined. So with the plans being responsive, it's time to continue with the next area of our starting page. So with the plans looking nice, it's now time to continue right here, so in this red part right here, with our key features. And the cool thing is that this will become your challenge, because your goal is to change the way these key features are displayed. The desktop version is fine actually, so everything should actually remain the way it is. The problem starts right here in the mobile version, because right there, I don't want to have these images and the corresponding text being displayed next to each other, but below each other. So we will start with this image and this text, then we'll have this image and that text, and the last one. That's the pattern. So it basically should follow the logic we had for our plans, so one after each other. For that, you actually only need media queries, of course, and you need to change the key feature class right here, this one, and the key feature list class. That's everything. So try it on your own. I can tell you that you won't need any properties or any features we didn't use so far throughout the course, so you should be able to solve it. So try it, and you can now pause the video, and after this break and after you tried it, I will show you one way how to solve this issue. Good luck! So how was it? Could you solve the challenge? Let me show you my solution. As I said, we have to work on the key feature list and on the key feature classes. And the problem is that these items are displayed horizontally and they should be displayed vertically. Now, if we go to our code, to the key feature class right here, we see the issue for that. It's basically display inline block, the same problem we had when we wanted to have our plans to be displayed like that. So let me quickly comment that out now, because we will need the code later for the desktop version. And with that, if we go back, we can see that our elements are now displayed vertically already. So this is already looking good. But the problem still is that these elements are not centered now. But we can quickly solve this, because the only thing we have to do right now is we have to get rid of this 30% width. Let me comment that out, because we will need it later also for the desktop version. And with that, if we reload the page, this works perfectly for all our mobile sizes now. So this looks good. The problem is that this is only the mobile part now, of course. In the desktop version, we have the same look, and we don't want that. We want to have our initial desktop look back. For that, we know how this works in the meanwhile. We only have to add a media query, and let's add it maybe again right here. So we write add media, open the bracket, and define our well-known min width of 30 rem, like that, and open the curly braces. Now, the thing we have to change right now for the desktop version is, of course, our key feature right here. So let's copy the entire code right here and paste it. We don't need to change vertical align, that's totally fine, that can be kept like that, or more specifically, we can actually delete it right here, because vertical align top is not required right here, if we have a look at it in the mobile view, because we only have this one line, and if it jumps to 2 lines, it's not an issue. We only had this vertical align top declaration to make sure that when we are in the desktop view, in this bigger one, that each text is aligned to the top when it's placed next to each other. Not an issue we have right now. That's why we can delete the vertical align top declaration, but we have to add it right here. And now we can simply comment in the display inline block and with 30% declarations, and of course delete the entire key feature rule right here. So if we now reload the page, we can see that our desktop view works fine again. And the same thing is true for our mobile view, because it simply behaves just as block level elements do. And as we can see, if we increase our size, the 30% are working, because the 30% that we added for the width are referring to this key feature. So basically to the width of that container right here. But it might make sense to also add a max width right here. We learned how this works. So let's add the max width property right here. So a nice value would be this one, so that it's kind of aligned with the plans we have right here. So if we go back to our media query and have a look at the plan, we defined a max width of 25 rem. So let's maybe simply copy that entire code and overwrite it right here, like that. And if we do that and reload the page, we can see that our elements keep increasing, so the gap increases. But as soon as we hit our max width, it won't increase anymore. So this looks really nice actually now. With that, we finished our starting page. It's now really responsive and looks really nice, as I would say. There are 2 more issues though, which are related to the starting page and also affect all other pages. This is the nav bar, as we can see up here. It doesn't look good. And also the footer does not behave exactly the way I would like it to behave. So as you now know all the basics about how to apply media queries and how they work, I think the best thing that follows this challenge is an assignment. So let's have a look at your assignment for the responsive design module in the next lecture. Until now, the size of our background image right here solely depends on the min width. So once we are above our minimum width right here, the height will be increased. We have a normal height of 33 VH for the mobile view and of 30 VH for the desktop view, as you could call it. Now for the mobile phone, this is totally fine. But if we say we have an iPad, for example, right here, which means that our view already jumps into the media query because the width is above our 40 rem. Let's maybe increase the size a bit. Not that much, maybe like that. Well, then the problem could be that if we go to the landscape mode, that the image might be too big. Because the width now is still above our limit for the media query, but it could be that the height is not enough now, because width and height simply changed due to landscape and portrait. Now the great thing would be if we could also consider the height at the same time. So we could say that we only want to increase our image or apply this media query in case both criteria are met. So we have enough width and enough height. Now the cool thing is that we can do this because with media queries, we can of course address the height, but we can not only address the height and the width separately, we can actually address both by creating more complex media queries. Now let's see how this works. Basically, we could simply add n right here and now specify a minimum height for our media query. This simply would mean that the code for this media query will only be applied if both criteria right here are met. So we have a min width of 40 rem and let's maybe say a min height of 60 rem, so something rather big. If we do that and reload our iPad right here, then you can see that our image didn't get any bigger because both criteria were not met. Did you see it? If I turn that back to 40 rem, for example, because then it would be applied. So if I reload, can you see it? The image then simply uses the code we added right here. So that's one way how you could solve something like that. You can use such combinators to basically make sure that both the min height and the min width are met. If we then go back to our portrait mode, for example, the larger image would be applied because we have enough space for both the width and the height. Another thing we could do is we can not only combine it like this with another minimum height, we could also say that the orientation must be a specific one. So if you write orientation right here, and then for example say orientation should be portrait, like that. If that's the case, and if we reload our device, we can see that, well, the media query is applied right here because we are in landscape mode. But if I turn the device, you can again see that this is now not our larger image because not both criteria are met. And therefore, the normal, the mobile view for our image will be loaded. I can also show you this for our plans because I think there it becomes more obvious. If we now simply add another condition right here, and this time maybe say orientation should be landscape, so only for landscape devices our larger view should be applied. If I now reload the page, you can see that nothing changes. But for the mobile view, we are now back in our mobile design because we now applied two different things. For our image up here, we simply said if we have a minimum width of 40 rem and the orientation of portrait, which is the case right here, then please apply that code right there. At the same time, we said if we have also the min width of 40 rem, but the orientation should be landscape, then please apply this code right here. And because of that, we can see that if we are in the portrait mode, the larger image and the app-like elements are applied. But for the landscape mode, we can see that we have the smaller image and all the information right here immediately. So this is how you can specifically target the way your website behaves, not only depending on the width of your device, but also of combinations, so of two different conditions met at the same time, and additional information like how the user uses its device, so in landscape or portrait mode. In addition to this AND combinator, so this one right here, we also have comma separated lists. This means if I now simply change the AND with a comma like that, then if one of these two conditions is true, then the code will be applied. This means we either have a minimum width of 40 rem or the landscape orientation to display our website according to this desktop view. So if I reload the page now, you can see that in the landscape mode, this desktop site is applied. But the same thing is true for the portrait mode, because for the portrait mode, this part, the min width of 40 rem, is correct. So we have this minimum width, therefore we can apply this code. And for the landscape orientation, well, actually both are true. For example, even if I would increase the min width to 200 rem and then reload the page, it would still apply the desktop mode because although the min width is not equal to 200 rem, because it's only 1024 pixels, but the orientation is landscape, therefore this desktop mode is applied right now. Now the thing is that we don't need that right here actually, so we can get rid of this part of the code. But if we go up here to our media query right there for the background image, the orientation portrait could actually make sense. And I'm saying could because there is a problem with that. If I go back to the website and change right here to the iPad back, then we can see that the smaller image is applied right here. And as soon as I switch it to portrait mode, the larger image is applied. But the problem is if I go back to my desktop view and now play around with the code, you can see that this works fine right here. Now we are still in portrait mode, and now it jumps back to the initial size because now the width is bigger than the height, and therefore the portrait mode basically is no longer existing. Therefore, using this orientation portrait can be an idea, but it's not the best one if you also want to make sure that your website looks good on a desktop device. Therefore, what we will do right here is we will go back to a minimum height for our media query right here. And let's say the minimum height should be maybe 60 rem, something like that. Let's see if we reload the page now. We can see that the media query is working fine again. We have the mobile view, which looks good. And then we have the desktop view for the bigger screens. Yeah, I think this looks nicer. So keep that in mind. Using portrait here can make sense, but basically with these logical operators, you can also combine a width and a height to always make sure that your website looks as good as possible on different devices and does not occupy too much space for images, for example, like it would be the case for us right here. And with that, we are actually almost done with this module. The only thing we should do in the next lecture is we should have a look at all the pages on our website and see if we have to add some more responsive code to it. So let's see what we created in this module and if all the responsive design is working, or if there are some pages left where we have to improve our code and make the page a bit more responsive. So I think our starting page right here, this is the mobile view, this looks pretty nice. If I reduce the size, it still looks good. We don't have any big issues, so I'm quite happy with that. If I click onto the modal appears. This is nice. Let's increase the size. This looks also good. So I would say for the starting page, let's increase it further. Yeah, the design is pretty nice actually. Let's have a look at the second page, the packages. The desktop view is nice. We have this footer in here still. We will fix that later, but I think for the moment, this is not a big issue. The more important thing is that the responsive design right here is working. It looks good. And yeah, I'm also quite happy with that. That's maybe a bit too less width. Actually, we won't go below this value, and this still looks fine actually. The great thing is that we didn't have to implement any responsive design on this page because the default behavior of the elements was sufficient to ensure this quite nice design on this page actually. Even if I have a look at the mobile view, for example, this looks fine right here. Let's now maybe also switch to the starting page once again. Yeah, I think it looks still good, even on the real or on the simulated mobile device. However, I think the customers page is not done yet. This looks okay right here, not a big problem, but right there, I don't know, this is not how it should be. I think a better approach would be that as soon as we are in the mobile view, so right here, we basically display the image on top, then we have the text of Mike Statham, then maybe the text of John Mello, and then the image of John Mello, so that we have kind of a nicer structure. As soon as we are in the desktop mode, it can actually kind of look the way it looks like right now. That's fine. So what this means for us is we have to work on the customers page. So let's do this now. For that, we have to go to the customer CSS file and now think about the way how we can achieve what we want. Again, we think mobile first, so we want to make sure that in this view right here, there is an image, then the text, then another text, and then the second image. Now, how can we achieve that? Well, let's have a look at the structure of this main page. we have the main element right here, then we have the div, and in this div we have the two testimonial classes. Inside these classes we have the image container and the info container. Same thing right here for the lower class. The first problem is that the image and the text is displayed next to each other. If we look at the code, we can see right here in the testimonial image container what the reason for that is. We have display inline block once again, so let's comment this out because we will need it later for the media query. And if we now go back and reload the page, we can see that now we are getting already closer to the result that we want to have. Now we have an image, the text, and another image. So with that, we achieved our first step. But still the text is not displayed as intended. So this is basically the testimonial info class. Let's maybe have a look at the code and find this class right here. And as we can see, we have also inline block right there. So if we comment this out like that, let's see what happens then, if it looks better. Yes, now we have the text aligned to the left. But if we now also get rid of the rest of the code right here, because why would it be aligned in the middle and why should it only have 30% of the width? We don't need that. Then we can see that the image and the text look a lot better now, right? Because that's probably more of a responsive design or a mobile design that we would like to have in the end. So with that, we already improved the image container and the info container. This looks better now. What we could then also change between the two testimonial classes, so right here and right there, is this margin in between that we had. I think if we just comment this out for the moment, we would kind of get the two testimonials a bit closer together. Let's see. Yeah, and I think with that, the page looks a bit cleaner maybe. What we can also get rid of is the vertical align right here. I don't think we need that anymore, so we can also comment this out right here, because now we have normal block level elements right here, and we don't need that vertical align command anymore. And then we have this testimonial list right here, but I don't think we have this class anymore in our code, so we can also comment this out for the moment. This shouldn't have any impact on our website right here. No, it hasn't, so we also got rid of this code now. And I think with that, our mobile design looks quite okay now. As we can see, it's probably not perfect yet, but we will come back to this image part later throughout the course and change the way the images are displayed in general. Therefore, I do not want to focus too much onto this right now. The only thing I want to make sure is that once we hit our desktop design, I want to make sure that the design doesn't stay like that, but that we have some responsive design in it. For that, let's go back to our code and let's add the media query at the bottom right here. The media query should again follow the behavior we know so far, so the min width of 40 rem. And which classes do we now target? I think the testimonial class right here with the free rem left and right margin is definitely something that we want to have back. So let's add it right here and comment the code in. Let's see what happens if I reload the page. We have a bit more margin between that in the desktop version, and that's definitely fine because we have more space available right here. The next class we could target is, and we could delete this before, of course, like that. So the next class we could target is our image container right here, because I would like to add back these two things right here, the display inline block and the vertical align middle declarations. So let's go down here and add it as a second class right here. Shouldn't forget about the curly braces right here. And we can delete this part and let's comment in the two declarations right here. If we do that and reload the page, we can see that our images are now again displayed to the left and to the right like that. So that's quite okay as it is for now. You might probably say that this looks kind of off, but trust me, as I said, we will work on this image part in more detail later, and then this structure will be exactly what we're going to need. What we still could do though, and this brings us quickly back to our mobile design, please excuse that now, but actually, why don't we make the image container with a width of 100% where it's possible, like that in the mobile design, like that, because with that the image gets bigger and bigger, like that. And if we then increase our max width to the 40 rem we had for our media query right here, like that, then we could also make a smooth transition to that. Can you see it? Now it jumps into the media query. And I think this looks a bit better because now we really have the images in the center when we watch the mobile view and then jump into our mobile query where the text gets kind of pulled apart like that. I think this looks better. So sorry for that little jump back to our mobile part again. But I think with that we can delete this part right here. And we also added the image container to our media query right here. The next thing we should add back in our media query is the testimonial info right here, right there. This is what we changed before. Let's maybe add a line, and this can of course stay in, but we should bring back the display inline block and the vertical align and the maximum width. So this brings us back to the design that we had before. So this is the media query right here. So as you can see, the text now jumps to the other side. That's exactly how it's intended. And as you can see, we now draw it apart or pull it apart. And as soon as our text has enough space, it jumps next to the image. That's actually exactly the behavior that we want to have. And I have to state that again, we'll dive into the details of this page throughout the course, so this is kind of a draft mode still. However, we added back the testimonial info class right here. Therefore, we can also delete this part from here, this part that we commented out. And although we will come back to this customers page, I think that the behavior we saw right here, so this jump basically, so we go from the mobile to that interim situation right here, and then to the final position we want to have, maybe we should fix that right now. Because it's an easy fix actually. Because the problem simply is that once we are leaving our mobile view, the image is simply too big. And as soon as we get more and more space right here, the text can jump next to the image, as I just explained. So why don't we just go back to our code and down to our media query, and now simply add a width right here of, let's say, maybe 66, so 2/3 of the entire page for our image container. Because if we do that and reload the page, we can see that now we don't have this jump anymore because we are in the mobile view. Then we come to our 640 pixels, and as this image only occupies 2/3 of our page, well, there is enough space for our testimonial info class right here, which only uses 30% of the width. And therefore, we could easily fix this issue and made sure that our page, well, as I think, already looks a lot better. There is another problem though, before we finish this customers page for now. Because if we increase the size of our website, as you can see it right here, I think there is a point where it doesn't look good anymore. And I would say this point is reached right here, let's say at roundabout maybe 1500 pixels. I think this looks still nice, but then if it gets, well, pulled apart further, it doesn't look good anymore. And we also learned how we can solve such a problem. Because we basically only need to make sure that the testimonial class, so this one right here, which basically contains, as we can see it, the images and the text, so right here and right there, both times we have this testimonial class. So if we would give this container a maximum width of this 1500 pixels, then we could ensure that the page gets not, well, pulled apart too far. Therefore, let's go back to the testimonial class and also add the max width property right here with 1500 pixels. Now, just in case you wonder why we are using pixels this time, the more consistent approach would of course be using RAM right here. But as we only applied rem so far for our media queries, and I would also like to show you that you can use pixels there. It's not what I recommend, but it's what you can do. I think it makes sense to use the 1500 pixels right here. As I said, this has more the demonstration purpose right here, not the real consistency approach that we would normally follow when creating our responsive website. If we do that and reload the page, we can see that it keeps moving the way we had it before, but as soon as we reach the 1500 pixels, it is stuck right here. The problem still is that it's kind of stuck in a strange way because the distance increases to the right of 𝗧𝗜𝗏𝗘 right here, but Mike 𝗧𝗏𝗡, our first testimonial, is stuck to this left side. And this issue can also be quickly solved if we just change our margin right here. So this one, the top and bottom margin is fine, but we should simply use our margin auto trick. That's the trick I showed you in the units module, and as you can see, we can apply it once again right here. If I now reload the page, we can see that we now have a really good status for our customers page. We have the starting situation right here with the mobile view. I think this little gap right here and right there is totally fine. That's simply due to the margin that we have right here on top of our first testimonial class and right here on top of the footer. But I think this is okay to keep this little distance. And if we then come to our 640 pixels breaking point, it jumps immediately to the desktop view and it gets bigger and bigger up to the point where we reach our 1500 pixels width, and with that it also looks nice on bigger screens. And with that, our customers page looks good. We now have a really nice responsive design. The problem though is that if I now look back to our packages page, which looks actually fine, I think if we are honest, we should also set a limit to the width these packages can have, because I think also from this 1500 pixels on, so right here, it shouldn't be able to increase anymore. So let's implement that fix to our packages page in the next lecture. So after fixing our customers page, let's now also limit the maximum width of our packages right here. For that, we can simply go back to our customers page and copy this media query right here. Now go to the packages CSS file and add the media query at the bottom of the code. Don't forget to add the closing curly braces right here. And now we don't need to select the testimonial class, of course, but this time we need the main element right here because this is the wrapping element for our packages right here. So with that, we can change testimonial to main like that. We can actually keep the margin of free rem to the top and to the bottom. I don't think this looks bad. And the max width should also be the same that we had for the customers page. If we now reload, we can see that we have a little bit of a gap up here now because of the margin we added, the top and bottom margin, but I think this looks nice. And we can also see that once we hit the 1500 pixels, so right here, the packages don't increase anymore or don't become any wider. The problem though is that we don't have all the borders right here because we actually didn't need these borders when we had this design. But once we see the entire package boxes, well, there should be a border to the left to our Plus and Premium plan, and there should be a border to the right of our free plan. Additionally, if we hover over our packages, like this, like that, the borders should also be complete and not being missing, like here, to the right side of our free plan. Now for that purpose, we need to add a second media query now. Now we also have an application case for this option. And this media query should become active once we hit a width of 1500 pixels. So the maximum width that we defined right here. So for that, let's copy the entire media query right here. I think that's the fastest way. And now change 40 rem to 1500 pixels. Again, that's the max width right here. So as soon as we reach this max width, we need to change certain properties. Now, which properties are that? Well, the first property we need to change is the border left none property right here, because this should simply be changed to this one right here, because that's the normal border we have. So we will select the package class right here. So this will become .package and get rid of that second declaration. And now simply add border left, right, border left. And now simply add this code right here. With that, if we go back and reload our page, you can see that the border to the left is now complete for our plus plan right here. And if we decrease the size, we can see it's not visible, and now it becomes visible. That's really cool. We also have to do this for the free plan. For that, we can find our free plan right here. Here it is, the border right none. So border right should also become this normal border design. So let's select, now I forgot the ID selector to be honest, this one here, the hashtag free, right there. Let's add it like this. And now this should be border right. That should be displayed. Let's copy the same design we had before. And if we now reload that page, we can see that we also have this right border now implemented, which looks also a lot better, as I would say. So the last thing we need to fix is now this hover effect. Right here, it's already implemented because we now added the border, and as we can see right here, we have our border left color defined. So as soon as we have the border, well, we can see this border color once we hover over it. So the only thing we have to do right now is we have to add this code right here. Simply add it as our third rule, maybe indent it a little bit better like that, and also like that. And now this should simply become border right color, like that. If we now also indent that a bit maybe to make sure we have a cleaner code, like this, like that, now it looks better. And if we now go back and reload, we can see that we now also fixed our packages page. We can hover over all these packages, we have all the borders, but once we go back below our 1500 pixel limit, we can see that the hover effect is only visible for the three borders we can see, and we also don't see the left, the right, and the left border right here. With that, we also finished the packages page, and I'm actually quite happy with the responsive design. But there are still two more things that I would like to fix to ensure that we have an as perfect as possible status for our website. And in the next lecture, I will therefore have another look at the navigation bar, because there is something not perfect yet. Let's see what that is in the next lecture. So what is my problem with the navigation bar? Before I show you that, there is another fix that we should implement. Because if we go back to our code and to our main CSS file, you remember that we added this media query right here with the min width and the min height. So this logical operator we have where we say that both criteria must be fulfilled. Well, the problem is that the min height was set a bit too high for our purposes. So in case we are using a laptop, for example, the image might look kind of awkward. Therefore, what we could do now is we could also set the main height to 40 rem. And with that, we can ensure that our image also looks good on laptops, for example. That's just a small fix. You won't see a difference right here because on my screen, it looks good. So this was the quick fix, but now I'm coming back to the navigation bar. Because if we look at the structure of our navigation bar, so right here in the header, and then we have our div right here, and then we have our anchor tag. And inside this anchor tag, we have our image. So we defined a height of 2.5 rem for our image. That's what we did when we worked on the responsive design. But the anchor tag actually has a font size defined, 1.5 rem. And this leads to the issue that if we have a look at the height of our image, this is like 40 pixels, but the anchor tag is 46 pixels, as you can see it in the left upper part of the screen. And although this is not a big problem, I don't think that's a logical behavior. Therefore, wouldn't it make more sense to simply get rid of the font size right here of our anchor tag and define a fixed height for our anchor tag of 2.5 rem, so the height we had for our image. And then the image can simply have a height of 100% of its containing element, which is the anchor tag, and then the structure would be a bit better. I think this would make sense, so let's go back to the code and let's now change this. For that, we have to go to our shared CSS file, this one right here, and now go to our main header brand and main header brand image selectors. So the main header brand shouldn't have a font size, we will delete that, but it should have a height of 2.5 rem. As we just said, this is the height we had so far for our logo, for our uhost logo. So as we now defined the height in the anchor tag, which is the containing element for our image, for our logo, we can simply set this height to 100%. If we do that and reload our page, we can see that nothing changed. We have this little gap right here. We'll fix that soon. But the cool thing now is that we have a height of 40 pixels right here for our image and of 40 pixels right there for our anchor tag, so for the containing element. And I think this is a better code structure, and we want to have a good code structure, so I think that was a nice fix. However, we now have this little gap right here between the background image and our navigation bar. This is simply due to 2.5 rem we now have for our image and for the anchor tag. And in addition to that, we also have right here in our header, we have this padding right here. As you can see it, we have a padding of 0.5 rem to the top and to the bottom. And this simply means if we now select our background image right here and go down in the code and see that we have a top margin or margin top of 3.75 rem, well, then this is a bit too much. So if we simply go back now to our main CSS file and go to our image right here and simply change this margin top to 3.5 rem like that and reload our page, we can see that now we fixed our navigation bar and our image still looks nice in all versions, so be it the mobile version or the desktop version. So this was the fix for our navigation bar and the two little fixes for our background image. Now there is only one final fix that we should also apply as part of this responsive design module. Because the footer, we talked about that, is kind of positioned in the middle of nowhere now. And this is also something we should have a look at now. So what is wrong with our footer? Well, as you can see, the footer is kind of positioned in the middle of nowhere. This is also true for the customers page. For the starting page, it's better because we have more content. But generally, I think it would definitely make sense to think about the way how to create a general style, so a style in our shared CSS file, which defines that the footer is always positioned at the bottom of our page. Now, how could we achieve that? Well, what we basically need is we need a header right here. Then we need the main part, which should leave us the gap for the footer at the bottom. Now, if you think back about our units module, why don't we simply add a height of 100 VH, so 100% of the viewport to our main element, and then deduct the height of our navbar, because that's the space the navbar needs at the beginning. So this means our main part would now simply end right here. And if we then also deduct the space our footer needs, then we would ensure that the footer is always positioned at the bottom of the page. Now, to achieve that, we simply need two things. We need to select our main element, and then we need a calculation formula. We already applied such a formula right here in our shared CSS file, because if we scroll down a bit to the main navigation selector, we have this formula, this calculation, so we know how to do this basically. Now, what formula would we need to make sure that the footer is positioned according to the way I just described? Well, basically, we could add the main selector as a starting point right here in our shared CSS file. Then we would need a minimum height. That's important because that's always the height our main element should have. And this should be calculated based on 100% of the viewport height minus, now what's the minus? Well, the minus must be our space that the navigation bar needs. We learned that in the last lecture. This is 3.5 rem, like that. And minus the space our footer needs. Now, what is the space our footer needs? Well, basically, if we inspect the footer, like that, this is 19 pixels plus 64 pixels for the top and bottom padding. So this means we have 83 pixels plus the 48 pixels for the top margin. So in total, this would be 131 pixels. And if we turn that into rem, we know 1 rem is 16 pixels, this would be 8 rem. So this means we need to deduct this 8 rem right here, like that. So this is the first step. This is the calculation formula we need. If we now reload the page, we can see that we have an issue right here. It's not perfectly positioned at the bottom. If we go to the customers page, it's also not perfect. But let's start on the landing page right here, because here on the starting page, it looks better. But let's inspect the structure of our page and let's see if it's really correct already here. Because if we go right here into our main element, we can see that one thing is missing actually. We are missing a top margin because the main element should not be hidden below our nav element. At the moment, this is not the case because we added the margin right here, this margin top, to our product overview ID, this one right here, our section element. The better approach would be to add such a 3.5 rem margin top to the shared CSS file. So let's add margin top right here of 3.5 rem, like that. And if we now reload the page, we cannot see a difference, but that's simply due to margin collapsing, because as we can see on product overview, we have our margin top, and we also have it for our main element right here. What we can do now is, we can go to our main CSS file and get rid of that margin top right here, because we now defined a general rule in our shared CSS file right here. If I now reload the page, this looks all right. And if we now have a look at the packages page, we can see it's still not working perfectly. And the same thing is true for the customers page. If we go to our packages page and inspect the main element, we can see that we already added a margin right here of 3 rem. Now, if we go into our code, into the packages CSS file, we can see that this is basically applied right here in our media query. Now, we don't need that anymore actually, so let's delete that part right here because we now have this general rule. And if we now go back and reload the page, we can see that it works now. Because as you can see, we now specified the margin top directly right here in the main element based on our shared CSS rule. And therefore, we don't need that rule in the media query anymore. And with that, our footer is now also positioned correctly right here on the packages page. Important, we still have this padding of 2 rem to the top, so this one. This is simply here to ensure that we have a distance between the nav bar and the actual packages, like that. But as you can see, this is just the padding. On top of the padding, we have our margin. If we scroll down, we can see it. This is the 56 pixels that we defined, and these are the 3.5 rem that we specified in our shared file. And with that, we also fixed the footer right here. Now, let's have a look at the final page, the customers page, because here we still have kind of a mess. If we have a look at our code, so in the customers CSS file right here, we can first see that we have this testimonial first of type, this margin top that we added, so basically the margin, that one right here. We don't need that anymore, because now we specified that we need a margin to the top for the main element already in the shared CSS file. This is this 3.5 rem margin we defined. So the remaining margin we need right here to ensure that this looks the same is 2.5 rem. And the next thing is, I don't think this has to be a margin. This could also be a padding that we add to our main element right here. Now, to make things short, we can simply delete that margin top right here, like that, if we now reload the page. We have the same behavior right here that we saw on the packages page, because right here, if we simply now remove the padding top right here, we can see that the main element is coming directly after the navigation bar because of the margin top of 3.5 rem. And that's the same behavior we have now right here. We have the main element, we have the margin top of 3.5 rem, and afterwards the main element comes. And now we can simply add another main selector right here. This one now in the customers file. And this should not give us a margin now because we don't need a margin. We can also use a padding top of 2.5 rem. Like that. With that, we have 2.5 rem for the padding. And if we reload the page, we can see that our image is positioned as before, but now with a different structure. Now we have a top padding of 2.5 rem plus the margin top that is applied generally for all our pages in the shared CSS file. And with that, if I click through our pages, as we can see, the footer is positioned correctly right here. It's positioned correctly right there in the packages file, on the packages side and on the customer side. Let's also have a look at the responsive design now. This looks good, looks still good, looks fine. Yes, I think this is a nice design we have right here. Let's also have a look at the packages page, at the mobile design right here. This looks fine. And if we increase the size, we can see that we made a mistake because we have to add back our left and right margin. This should be auto. Remember, we have to add the margin left auto and a margin right of auto like that. So if I now reload the page, we can see we got our responsive design back right here and right there. This looks fine. So let's also have a final look at the customers page right here. Let's see if the responsive design works. We have the limitation if it gets above the 1500 pixels, and we have the nice mobile design. The footer also works perfectly. Important maybe if we go to the customers page right here and down there to our media query, I kept the margin of 3 rem and auto for the media query because right here it makes sense that once we go to our desktop design that we have this little gap right here. Therefore, I will leave that margin as it is. And with that, we finally finished this responsive design module. So in the next lecture, it's time to summarize what we learned in here. So this really was a lot of work, but we did it. That's the great thing. And what's also great is that we now turned our nice desktop website into a fully responsive website. And for that, we only needed to apply some core concepts. Now, what did we apply? What did we learn? Well, the first thing we learned is that the responsive design is required to make our website look beautiful on all devices. So not on the desktop device only, but also on the smartphone, on the tablet, on any device that we want to use. We also saw that the viewport meta tag is a really important starting point to ensure this responsive design really works in the end, because it allows us to adjust the viewport according to our device sizes. And what this specifically meant is that with this viewport meta tag, we are able to convert the hardware pixels, so the actual pixels you read in the hardware specifications of your device, into the software pixels, which basically take into account the actual width, the actual size of your device. We saw that based on that pixel ratio, and we also saw that with that, the pixel amount decreased, and therefore the content size increased, so the readability was improved. And then we had the media queries. These allowed us finally to change also the properties and therefore the entire look of our website depending on the width or the height of the device we are using. And we can simply add this media queries by adding add media to our CSS code, and with that we were able to create this awesomely responsive website. Now we are of course not done yet. That's also the reason, for example, why we didn't put all the media queries at the end of the code. As I said in the beginning, this is actually the way you add these media queries. But we have to add more features to our website, so we might come back to the media queries again. But in the next lecture, it's now time to hand over to Max again, because he will show you how you can easily create forms with CSS.